Hello, my name is Glen Alexander and thank you very much for watching this video. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different from my normal work and do an analysis of a painting. This painting is the 1865 Queen Elizabeth and Leicester by William Frederick Yeames, Leicester referring to the Queen's favourite, Robert Dudley, the 1st Earl of Leicester. This court scene is an oil on canvas, 72 by 92.5 centimetres and signed and dated by the artist in the lower left corner. Now, before we proceed to analyse the picture, I would like to give you a little context on the artist, genre and my particular interest in it. This is the artist, William Frederick Yeames, part of a group of late Victorian artists known as the St John's Wood clique. They concentrated on subjects typically of a historical nature, such as the Tudors and Stuarts, and narrative paintings in which the story is often revealed by a closer inspection of the subject's actions and expressions, and the finer details in the picture. This is the work he is best known for, the 1878 And When Did You Last See Your Father? An imaginary scene set in a royalist household during the English Civil War. Here is a boy being questioned about the whereabouts of his royalist father. Is it better to lie or have your father die? The genre of Yeames' work is known as the problem picture, which is deliberately ambiguous in nature and can be interpreted in different ways, creating an unresolved dilemma for the viewer in which they are invited to speculate an explanation for the scene. For example, here in the 1877 Amy Robsart, the first wife of Robert Dudley, who mysteriously and suspiciously fell or flew down a flight of stairs within 2 years of Elizabeth acceding to the throne. The coroner's verdict was an accident, but it caused quite a scandal in its day. Now, I'm very interested in this particular picture of Robert Dudley and Elizabeth I because I accidentally became embroiled in a debate in which I had absolutely no interest before when I was making this video. It's an 8-hour video in one take. It was only supposed to take 3, but I got a little bit carried away. And this particular debate starts around the 5-hour mark. It follows from my analysis of this monumentally important book. I believe it not only solves the Shakespeare authorship debate, but contains, as its author says, the secret of secrets. The clue is in the title, actually, if you know the meaning of the word, accedence. The author of this book I prove to be Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, who is the leading candidate in the Shakespeare authorship debate, thought by many from Freud to Robin Williams, Malcolm X, Anna Rice, Walt Whitman, to the great Sir Roger Penrose. Now, within this book on page 117, or I-17 if you prefer, the author starts teaching the order of direct pedigree, a descending order of the kings and queens of England, and then an ascending order. But immediately following on page 118, you'll see it says, "But ere you depart as I first began with a shield of antiquity, worthily born of old for honour's sake, so will I end likewise with a famous scutcheon of renown, whose first bearing did wholly spring of the former cause." This author is being equivocal. He's not just talking about the 2 escutcheons, shields, but about his very pedigree. It's also worth noting in whose first bearing did wholly spring of the former cause, spring translated in Latin is ver, as in Edward de Vere. You may also notice in the changeover between descending and ascending order, we have the coat of arms of Edward the Confessor and a Bible verse. The arms relate to a very beautiful and meaningful window in Westminster Abbey where those arms can be found, and which I've already shown you in previous videos. The Bible verse refers to Ecclesiastes verse 10:17. Remember, he's the 17th Earl of Oxford, which, if we were to look up in the King James 1611 Bible, you'll find 4 pilcrows. There are only 4 pilcrows in chapter 10, and look at which verse is in between these 4 without a pilcrow. Verse 17. If we then compare the difference from the verse given in the antecedents, well is thee, O land, whose king is come of nobles, to that of the 1611 King James Bible. Blessed art thou, O land, when thy king is the son of nobles, and thy princes eat in due season. Well, you've just seen a season, the season of spring, or the. Lastly, please regard the Pegasus in the paragraph immediately following, a page that starts Father to King Edward IV, and you have just seen 4 pilcrows. Relevant as Robert Dudley was made the Master of the Horse by Elizabeth I the day after her acceding to the throne. He was also strongly involved with the Inner Temple Law Courts, who admitted him as the most privileged member and Lord and Governor. Their emblem is also a Pegasus. Now, I believe I am one of the first, if not the first, to suggest this particular variation of what's called Prince Tudor theory in specific relation to Edward de Vere, that Robert Dudley and Elizabeth I are Edward de Vere's real birth parents. And this makes a lot of sense, actually. Robert Dudley was the Queen's chief suitor for years, known as her favourite, and proposed to her. They are of similar age, within 2 years of each other. He's the son of the Duke, she's the daughter of a king, both ardent lovers of learning, childhood friends, probably more than childhood friends. She had his last letter in her possession when she died, and most importantly, they had their bedchambers next to each other, and I'm pretty sure contraception wasn't as effective as it is now in the 16th century. I think this is pretty blindingly obvious, to be honest. But wasn't she a virgin queen, Glen? Why do you think that? Because that's what she was called. Do you believe everything you were told? I suppose Herodotus, everything Herodotus wrote was true too. This perhaps is political propaganda. How do you think she wanted to be seen with a bastard child she had at 16, particularly in a religious country? Allow me to playfully reframe this for you. She's not the Virgin Queen, she's the Virgin Queen. Hence, I'm very interested in this portrait of Robert Dudley and Elizabeth I, and even more so with who is in the corner. You will notice there are 5 people in this picture. You can see 4 of which whose faces are visible, and one whose identity is a mystery. Before we proceed to analyse this picture, it's worth remembering this is William Frederick Yeames' interpretation of the scene. After all, it was done in 1865. So the first thing we should do is look to where he's drawn his inspiration from. I'm pretty convinced this is from some Elizabethan court confessions. The source I'm using is from the Folgerpedia, the Elizabethan Court Day by Day 1569 by Marion E. Colthorpe. I find this really helpful, actually, for understanding what is going on in the scene. Now, the scene is said to have happened on the 10th of August at Guildford, and the account comes from the Duke of Norfolk's 1571 confessions writing about this day. I've emboldened some relevant things for emphasis which I believe may have inspired Yeames. The Duke's Confession 1571. At Oatlands, Leicester had told me to defer speaking of my marriage plans to the Queen till my Lady Lennox were gone, who went no further than that house. At her Highness's coming to Guildford came words that the Lord of Lethington came not, upon the coming of whom the breaking of my cause was so long stayed. And then my Lord of Leicester told me that he would earnestly labour her Majesty to talk with me in the matter. and coming up one morning unawares into the privy chamber at Guildford, I found there one of Mr. More's children playing upon the lute and singing, Her Majesty sitting upon the threshold of the door, my Lord of Leicester kneeling by her Highness. I was going, but Her Majesty commanded me to come into the chamber. Not long after, my Lord of Leicester rose and came to me, leaving Her Highness hearing the child, and told me that, as I was coming up, he was dealing with Her Majesty in my behalf, and that Her Highness had promised to speak with me at Thornham at my Lord Arundel's. Before Her Majesty came to Thornham, Her Highness commanded me to sit most unworthy at Her Majesty's board, where in the end of dinner Her Majesty gave me a nip, saying she would wish me to take good heed to my pillow. I was abashed at Her Majesty's speech, but I thought no fit time nor place there to trouble Her Highness. Mr. More's children, William More of Loosely near Guildford, had 3 children. George More, aged 15, and his sisters, Mrs. Elizabeth Polstead and Anne More. Thornham, belonging to the Earl of Arundel, has not been identified. The first thing to say about this picture is it's very much William Frederick Yeames' interpretation of this aforementioned court scene. It supposedly happened on the 10th of August 1569. That makes Robert Dudley 37, Elizabeth 35, Edward de Vere 19, and George More 15. And as you can clearly see, that is not a 37-year-old man. Similarly, the boy in the corner is clearly not 15 or 19. So Yeames seems to be playing with time and age. However, the young man in the tapestry of the background does seem to be of the age of 15 to 19. Next, if I were to ask you what stands out the most in this picture, what catches your eye the most, I'd hope you'd tell me the bright red object in between the 2 title characters. It seems a little incongruous as a hat for Robert Dudley, given he's not wearing any red in his outfit. Perhaps he's overcompensating for those greys. But I think the real reason why your attention is being drawn to this bright red hat is because of the significancy of the hats in this picture, starting with the hat by the lute playing boy. In fact, this hat seems to be more suited to Dudley's outfit. It's almost as if the young boy and Dudley have switched hats, given the elements of red in the boy's outfit, and that the hat also feels mismatched. Why would Dudley switch hats with William More's son? That doesn't make sense. You will, however, notice there's someone in the background who is wearing a similar red hat, the young man in the tapestry. Here's the picture of the bright red hat, and you will see it is beneath the joining hands of Robert Dudley and Elizabeth I. You will also notice the young man seems to have the same colour hair as the Queen. How interesting. To refer back to the pages 117, 118 of the Ascendants I showed you earlier, at the end of the ascending pedigree part, it says, Father to the most high and mighty princes, and our most dread sovereign, the Queen's Majesty, that now is, of whom I pray God, if it be his will, to send some fruit, as well to comfort of her Majesty, as to the great joy of all her subjects. And what is the border of this tapestry but a border of fruit, the corner of which is being cut by Robert Dudley? The next thing we'll look at is the collars. You may notice all the collars in the foreground characters look all of a similar kind, all being of the same collar family or kin, so to speak, whereas the collars of the background characters differ, one being of similar proportional size but blue, the other shorter and more inconspicuous. If we look at the main action in the scene, we have Dudley affectionately kissing the hand of the Queen whilst gazing adoringly at her. The Queen, on the other hand, is looking down, fanning herself with a peacock feather, the peacock a symbol of beauty, majesty, and immortality. But also notice her eyes seem to be looking down at her ring finger, where there is a ring. This is likely Yeames suggesting the scene is about Dudley and Norfolk's proposal for the Queen's hand. If we also look below, we'll see Dudley is quite literally trying to get his foot in, which is part hidden by the folds of Her Majesty's dress. The tip of her foot is also gently protruding in what seems to be a regal game of footsie. The gloves on the floor in front, you will see, appear to be at right angles, with one glove folded slightly and in such a way as to give the impression of one hand placed on top another. On the other side of the Queen, we seem to have roses, one red and a red and white, or perhaps pink one. Elizabeth was from the House of Tudor, which was represented by the red and white Tudor rose. And you may remember from our source material, my Lord of Leicester rose. And given he is holding a hat of the same colour, we can assume he is suggested by the red rose, the two roses in front of our protagonists. You'll also see these two roses are on a rectangular floor panel, which is adjacent to two narrower rectangles of approximately the same colour either side. However, the narrower panel on the left has a tint added. That's Yeames adding white paint to it. Whereas the other floor panel on the right of the roses seems to be the same colour and tone, with little distinguishing it from the rosed panel. In fact, these two floor panels look more of a T, and who is at the end of this rosed T but the lute playing boy? Remember also the source material said, "Take good heed to my pillow." Heed means give attention to, and we should pay attention to this pillow, not just because of its beautiful golden tassels, but because of its very colour. At the end of the Accedents of Armoury, you'll find this table of armorial colours used in a coat of arms, with an explanation of tricking. That's using one letter to represent the colour. The way to understand tricking. The old order in tricking of all manner of arms is to use one letter for one word. It is necessary for heroical artificers, as by example, the Queen's Majesty of England beareth quarterly France and England. The first azure, which is what the B represents, flowers de luce, O, or the second jewels, 3 lions, passant, or the third is the second, the fourth as the first. Pay attention to the example given. The word England, this is the same word in the same sentence, but has an added E on the end. This is the rhetorical figure of addition, adding one letter to change the meaning of a word, which he uses throughout this book and many others he's written, to signal cunning and the artful conceit of the author. Why this E? Well, E is the first and last letter of Edward de Vere, and the most characteristic letter, appearing 4 times. Why am I telling you this? Well, have a look at ver, or ver T. Remember what spring was in Latin? This is the armorial term for green, and you'll notice green has an added E on the end. Earlier in the book, when he explains the meaning of each colour in more depth, he refers to ver with an E on the end. And what's more, there's our pilcrow again, which is not present with any other colour in this book, and provides a major proof in this book and others. E.g., there's a letter by Edward de Vere in Cardenas Comfort. He signs his name with the last paragraph having a pilcrow. Now, he's also tricked you quite literally. There's one colour missing. Nothing's missing. quite literally, the colour black or sable. And he tells you this by giving you another example. Black with an E on the end, and on the following line, black without. So you can see he is doing this. Black being the colour of nothing, or sable in immemorial terms. And nothing is what Edward de Vere became. I could also mention the funny spelling of orange. That's the figure of exchange, changing the A for the E. And you'll notice that's tricked with T. So, ver is green, green is ver. So if we return to the lute playing child, we'll see he's sitting on a ver pillow with some orange shorts at the end of a rosed T. How apt. It's also worth noting he's playing a black lute, i.e. he's playing nothing, with Yeames masterfully hinting at white and silver, which is argent, and gold, or the three colours that form Shakespeare's coat of arms, or argent and sable. You will also see the ribbon bow, which you will find crops up all over the place, such as on the front of the Accedents of Armoury, or the monument which the Shakespeare Monument in Westminster Abbey is directly looking at, where the inscription below this bow coincidentally reads Edward, Robert, in block capitals. Kin means family, A and T are the first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet. You can watch this in my video, Where is Shakespeare Buried? So, we've discussed the roses with the lute playing boy seemingly at the end of. However, there are two more particularly interesting flowers. A pink flower behind Elizabeth's ear, and one approximately at the same level as the crown facing the young man in the tapestry. This flower to me seems to be more of a pink carnation than a rose. A pink carnation symbolising a mother's love, which is why it's often the flower of Mother's Day. If we do some colour analysis and comparison of the young gentleman's clothing, we shall find the same pink of the inner lining of the Queen's dress and the blue from Dudley's attire. If we then compare this to the young boy, we can see the masterful hints of both the pink of the boy's stocking and the blue of the shirt, seemingly echoing each other. Returning to our young gentleman, we can also see his spear or rolled up flag, whose tip transcends the limit of the frame. It's worth observing the orientation of the spear at a very similar angle to the one going across the bend of Shakespeare's coat of arms. There's also a lot of meaning in the background of this tapestry too, but it's helpful to return to the Dudley portrait to understand this. Firstly, on both his brooch and his chain we have a white horse, much like the Pegasus we saw earlier. Remember, the Queen made him master of the horse immediately following her accedence. You'll also see the dog below. I could also mention the shells surrounding the arms behind him and the Order of Saint Michel, but that can wait. But I will mention my favourite thing, the curly kippers horns on many book frontispieces and windows. This is just to gently remind you he was Chancellor of the University of Oxford at one stage and had a major role in helping found Oxford University Press. And that's all I'll say on that. So, to our tapestry, we have a white horse, we have our dog, and Dudley himself cutting through the corner. His back forming lines somewhat parallel to the hill on which the young gentleman stands. The two dog faces also gently mirror that of Dudley and Elizabeth. The last thing I'll say about this tapestry is there seems to be fire emerging from the right-angled hand of the young gentleman, just as there's some fire at the top of the Accedents. emerging from a golden lamp in front of some very lovely windows in Westminster Abbey and above the grave of this author. A book all about a library, the most comparable one to Shakespeare, burning down, with some references to glass and windows in it and some fun proofs. And lastly, behind the monument to Shakespeare in Stratford-upon-Avon, where there is a flaming ox being sacrificed. Remember Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. If we compare the light and shade in this picture, you will clearly observe one side is brighter than the other. This may help clarify. You will also see that the panels or pictures on the right hand side are unclear, ill-defined, seem almost to be fire damaged, quite ambiguous, just as we are uncertain of the child's identity below. Interestingly, Yeames signs his name with what looks like a lamp, and the light in the picture is coming from that direction. Yeames has also written his name in the lower left corner, which gives the picture a wonderful poetic symmetry. Two artists in each of the lower corners. The last main element in this picture to discuss is where the child is facing, in the direction of the Duke of Norfolk, who is emerging from behind a curtain. When I first saw this picture, I thought it might be a player on the stage with the raised platform and the curtains, which Yeames may well also be suggesting. But we know this to be the 4th Duke of Norfolk from our source material, coming to the Privy Chamber unawares. This is Thomas Howard, the 4th Duke of Norfolk, one of the wealthiest landowners in the country, who, as we saw from his confessions, was harbouring his own ambitions to marry the Queen. 2 years after this scene, he was executed for his role in the Ridolfi plot, a plot to assassinate Queen Elizabeth I and replace her with Mary, Queen of Scots, who he'd then marry. This is probably why Yeames depicts him as clutching the gold of the curtains and staring desirously at the Queen, or is that at her crown? Probably also why he's covering his knee. Very interestingly, he's also the cousin of Edward de Vere, and weirdly, Norfolk's second wife was at one time Dudley's sister-in-law. Since we've been thematically dealing with fathers and sons, it's worth considering who Thomas Howard's father is. This is his father, Henry Howard, the Earl of Surrey, the uncle of Edward de Vere, for he was married to Frances de Vere. He's pictured here between the arms of Edward II and Edward III. Now, he courted the arms of Edward the Confessor, which you saw earlier, which means added to his own coat of arms, which he did have a right to do, but made Henry VIII quite paranoid, and consequently he also lost his head. It's very relevant that he was known as the Poet Earl, as he's seen as one of the founders of English Renaissance poetry, but most crucially he's regarded as the father of the English or Shakespearean sonnet, the form Shakespeare would later adopt for his sonnets. This is where he's buried, in Framlington Church, Suffolk, where you can clearly see the de Vere coat of arms with its single star. So, as you can see, our unknown sitter is looking at a relative of Edward de Vere and the son of the father of the Shakespearean sonnet. Lovely. From all the meaning and signification Yeames has given his interpretation, I don't think for a second this boy is George Moore, but it is by sheer coincidence a golden name. Now, for something incredible, from one unknown sitter to another. Here's an unknown sitter formerly known as Thomas Howard, our 4th Duke of Norfolk, currently residing in the National Portrait Gallery. Are you ready? This picture is a chromolithograph of this picture. kindly given by the Medici Society. This is the original picture, as I don't have copyright to show you the lithograph copy, but it's the original, so who cares? This is Titian's The Young Englishman, who I've been saying is Edward de Vere since Valentine's Day last year. We know he visited Titian's studio. Do you really think he wouldn't stop for a souvenir? Let me put Mum and Dad behind him and appeal directly to your eyes. Dad's nose, Mum's hair. I'm a big fan of Bertrand Russell's direct acquaintance. Not any preconceived ideas or descriptions, but what you can directly see and experience for yourself. Look at the resemblance, and moreover, start to look at the lines in the background of this portrait, particularly over his shoulder in his looming shadow. Now, I've already shown you the Vere and the single star from the De Vere coat of arms and the man behind the mask artfully hidden within the lines of the background. But there's more. Believe me, there's quite a lot more hidden. I discussed the pearl in the open shell at the end of this video, but there's more. Perhaps even a coronation. We shall see. If you can't see what's in the hidden lines, it can take some time, or I'd suggest you visit an optician. Sorry, I couldn't resist. It's a magnificent portrait, and I still have quite a lot more to say on it. So, there we go. The unknown sitter is looking in a way at his own image, and I commend the National Portrait Gallery, whether unintentionally or intentionally, for their poetic wit. I shall conclude my analysis by drawing your attention to the element Yeames repeats most in this picture, a recurring idea or motif. That is, corners. If you know my video Where is Shakespeare Buried, this will be even more meaningful for you. There are a lot of corners and right angles in this picture. In fact, if you want to play a game with me, much like Guess the Sweets in a Jar, I invite you to count the number of corners. Answers in the comments if you decide you want to play. And why is Yeames emphasising the corners in this picture? Well, why do you think? Who's in the corner? I believe wholeheartedly it's Edward de Vere, although perhaps I should start calling him Edward Tudor Dudley. Thank you very much.